Hungarian Folk Tales. Butcher Boy George. Once upon a time, in a land far, far beyond the hills, there lived a youth named Butcher Boy George. You could travel the length and breadth of the land, visit 7 villages, and never find his match. So strong was the boy that he needed no meat cleaver. He could kill a bull with his bare hands. One day, Butcher Boy George decided to bid farewell. So he said goodbye to his father and his mother, and he set out to see the world. He rambled and ambled across the lands, and on the 7th day of his journey, he arrived at the edge of a huge, dark forest. He looked to the left, he looked to the right, to see if perhaps he could espy the glow of a campfire, and indeed, he suddenly saw the shimmer of flames flickering between the trees. He set out towards the fire, but then thought better of it, for he feared that perhaps the fire had been lit by bandits. But hardly had he taken a step, and again the glow of the flames flickered in front of him. Again he turned to the left, he turned to the right, but no matter which way he turned, the shimmer of the campfire always followed his gaze. "Oh," said Butcher Boy George, "come what may, I will not turn away any more like a sheep trying to flee the wolves." And he went straight in the direction of the fire. When he reached the fire, he saw an old woman poking at its coals, trying to kindle their glow. He greeted her. "Good evening, good woman." "Good evening to you, my boy. What brings you to this distant forest?" "I'm searching for lodging, good woman. If only I could find a place to rest my head." "I could give you a place to rest your head, but I must warn you that every night demons come to my house at the first stroke of midnight, and they bring grief to anyone they find." "I do not fear, good woman. I only want a warm bed for the night. The rest is my concern." The old woman mumbled something to herself, blinked with her falcon-like eyes, led the boy to his room, made his bed, and left him there. The boy went to bed, and he soon fell asleep. But he did not sleep long, for at the first stroke of midnight, the demons began knocking at the doors and windows, making such a clatter that the whole house began to shake. Even Butcher Boy John felt frightened by this. Leaping from his bed, he took his stick in his hand and waited to see what would happen. Suddenly the door gave a mighty creak, a tremendous chest flew into the room, a long walking stick popped out of the chest, wearing a red cap on its end, and lunged at Butcher Boy George. But Butcher Boy George knew a thing or two about demons. He knocked the red hat from the end of the walking stick, the hat rolled under the bed, and as all the demon's strength was held in this hat, the walking stick too quickly took refuge under the bed. So Butcher Boy George leapt out the door, turned to make the sign of the cross on it so that the demon would be trapped, and withdrew to hide out on the porch. Meanwhile, day was beginning to break outside. Cockerels had begun to crow, and the demons returned to their realm. As soon as the demons had departed, Butcher Boy George went into the old woman's kitchen. You cannot imagine the spectacle that awaited him there. The fire was blazing high, and its flames licked at the bottom of a soot-black cauldron of boiling tar. In front of the fireplace, a beautiful young maiden sat stirring the tar and sobbing to herself. "Why are you crying, gentle maiden?" "Oh, my poor soul," the maiden replied. "Alas, I have good reason to sob. I stir this boiling tar for my own weak body." "And who told you to do this?" asked Butcher Boy George. The old woman who took you in, she hired me as a cleaning girl, but she did not need a cleaning girl. In truth, she seeks to make a witch of me. But since I refuse to become a witch, she will burn my body to ashes and dust in this boiling tar." "Fie!" cried Butterboy George. "I will put a stop to this. Do not fear, gentle maiden. Just keep stirring the tar and blowing the coals that they glow red hot beneath the cauldron, for the tar will be the witch's bathwater, not yours." Then suddenly the old witch arrived and she asked the girl, "Has the tar come to the boil?" "It has, old woman, it has." "And you? Do you want to be a witch?" "I do not," answered the maiden. "I ask you for a second time. Do you want to be a witch?" "I do not." "I ask you for a third and last time. Do you want to be a witch?" "And I answer for the third time. I do not." "Oh, you wretched maiden, into the cauldron with you!" But Butcherboy George had heard quite enough. He leapt out from behind the door, took the witch in his hands, spun her in the air, and tossed her into the cauldron of boiling tar. In the blink of an eye, her body sizzled to ash. "And now, gentle maiden, the world is ours," said Butcherboy George. "Come with me, and we shall be man and wife forevermore." The girl wasted no more time, for the brave butcher boy had won her heart. But before they departed, they went to the cellar, where there was enough gold and silver for every village in the land. They gathered as much silver and gold as they could and left the rest, that others might have some too. And together they lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Discontented Cooking Pot. The cooking pot was bored with boiling and bubbling all day, so he began to complain to the walking stick. "I can't bear to stay here anymore." "I too long to leave this place," replied the walking stick. "So let us set out together, my friend." "Yes, let's, for the journey is always more pleasant when one has company." The pot and the walking stick set out to see the world. Neither of them was terribly clever. The pot, as of course you know, was empty inside, and the walking stick was hardly famous for his wit. At first, however, things looked promising. For when the pot was almost trampled on the path by the angry bull, the walking stick leapt up and began to whack the bull soundly on its backside. And while the walking stick was walloping the bull, the pot jumped into the river. "Swim, swim," shouted the walking stick. "I'll catch up with you soon." The walking stick soon grew bored with whacking the bull, so he too jumped into the water. He thumbed his nose at the bull, who bellowed from the bank, but was unable to follow him. At the end of the village, the walking stick came across a pack of stray dogs. And when the dogs attacked, the cooking pot shouted, whack them, my friend." And the stick gave the dogs a sound beating. And as they continued on their way, they came across the terrible monster of the mines. The monster of the mines was terrified, for he had never seen a pot and a walking stick out for a stroll all on their own before. "Horrors, what a fright! I'll grab my bag and take flight." And the monster of the mines fled and took shelter in the hollows of the cliff. And as he ran so quickly, he failed to notice that there was a hole in his bag, and glittering gold coins were falling on the ground. But the pot and the walking stick noticed. "Come, come, let's gather them up." The walking stick neither dillied nor dallied. He gathered up the coins and put them into the pot. The pot was brimming with gold. No one would have dared to call him empty-headed anymore. "How fortunate we've been," they said to each other. And they began to weave the most elaborate plans, visions of wealth and grandeur for their future together. The pot thought to himself, "I shall find someone who will wrap me in wire and make me immortal. They will cover me with wire, strong wire, all over, that I may never crack or break. And once I have ensured my immortality, I will ensure myself a life of leisure and comfort. I will bribe the cook to make sure I am always brimming over with stuffed cabbage." For the pot simply adored stuffed cabbage. Then the walking stick's vanity also rose to the fore. "From now on, I will be a great lord, and after I have split the riches with my friend, I will find a skilled blacksmith and have a golden button made for my head." But then again, he thought after a moment, if I had all the gold we found to myself, I wouldn't have to content myself with a mere button. I could have my entire head covered in gold. Heavens, it would be simply splendid. I would be the most beautiful walking stick in the country. Maybe even the king would notice. Perhaps he would even want me to be his sceptre. And why should I not have all the gold? For am I not the stronger one? His head was teeming with cruel and murderous thoughts. And when the pot laid down his head to sleep at night, the walking stick snuck over to his side and delivered him a single lethal whack. And thus the pot's good fortune turned out to be deadly misfortune. The poor pot shattered fragments, clattered, clacked and cried out, "Murderer! Murderer!" But the walking stick barely noticed his cries, and he stuffed the golden coins in a sack and set off to find a blacksmith. "God's blessings on you, good blacksmith. What have you brought me, honourable walking stick?" "A sack full of golden coins, blacksmith." "Where did you get that, you rascal?" "I found it by the side of the road," said the walking stick, feigning a look of innocence. "And what do you plan to do with all that money?" "You are but a mere walking stick. Good blacksmith, make me a golden knob for my head." The blacksmith took the golden coins, melted them, shaped them into a lovely knob, and soldered it on to the walking stick's head. "There you are," he said to the walking stick. "You may now set out to find yourself a wife." But his golden head, itself the fruit of his cruel act, would bring him no joy, only misfortune. His path took him deep into the forest, and Black Jack, the infamous bandit, spotted him. And the brigand spoke. "The knob on that walking stick is made of gold, if I am not mistaken. Look, Matty, how shiny it is. Let's chase him down, grab him and take his golden knob." "Stop, stop," they cried. But naturally the walking stick did not stop, but ran from the bandits. He was gasping for breath when he reached the top of the high hill, and the bandits were still hot behind him. At the bottom of the tremendous chasm gaping below him flowed the waters of the mighty river. The walking stick had little choice but to jump into the waters below. He tried to summon his courage. "I am, after all, a walking stick. I can swim. I am made of wood. I will reach the far bank. I am, after all, a walking stick. I can swim. I am made of wood. I will reach the far bank." And so he jumped into the waters. But lo, soon the waves were splashing over his head. He sank to the bottom, never again to rise to the surface. For the golden knob, the spoils of a cruel misdeed, pulled him into the depths, down, 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 to a watery grave. Hungarian Folk Tales. Fisherman John. By the banks of a mighty river stood a fisherman's hut, and in that hut a fisherman lived together with his wife, but alas, they had no children. One moonlit night, the old man went down to the river, and he cast his net. Suddenly he saw something approaching on the waters, and it shined like a star. He watched as it neared him. And what did it turn out to be? A small coffin. And in the coffin lay an infant child, fast asleep. He lifted the coffin from the waters, placed it in his boat, and took it home to his wife. "Look what I caught in the river." And lo, he showed her the beautiful golden-haired child. "We have no children of our own," he said. "We are old. We will raise him, and then we will have someone to care for us." The old woman agreed. Time passed and the child began to go to school. The school teacher had a scrawny little horse. He said to John, for that was the boy's name, "Little John, tell your father he could buy this horse." So John ran home full of excitement and told his father. "Father, my school teacher has a horse for sale. Let's buy it." "We don't need a horse, son. We have neither hay nor oats. How would we feed it?" The boy said, "It could graze in the woods by the banks of the river." So they bought the scrawny horse, and the horse grazed in the woods by the banks of the river. One day, the horse spoke. "Listen, John, at the edge of the village there is a small house. In it, a worn saddle. Ask the owner to sell it. If he won't sell it, steal it." The owner gave John the saddle, for he had no need of it. And little John took it home and put it on the horse's back. Then the horse said, "Go, John, to the edge of the village. There is an old bridle bit. Buy it, and if the owner will not sell it, steal it." But the owner would not sell the bit. So John stole it. Again the horse spoke. "John, go to the village. There is an officer there who has a rusty sword, and if he will not give it to you, steal it." The soldier gave John the sword and told him, "Polish it until it shines. Be a soldier." John returned home and again the horse spoke. "Master Fisherman John, tell your father to buy you new clothes." The old man said, "Son, I cannot buy you new clothes, for I have no money." But John insisted and told his father that he would pay for the clothes. So his father agreed and bought him new clothes. Again the horse spoke. "My dear John, polish the harness, the bit and the sword, then clean the saddle and put it on my back." He continued, "My dear Master John, you have a younger sister whom we shall bring back." John, however, insisted that he had no sister. The horse said, "Yes, you do, at the edge of the neighbouring country. She is locked away and only rarely sees the sunlight. Climb on my back and we shall set off." They went to the edge of the neighbouring country and found the house where the girl was locked away. There the horse spoke. "John, kick the door 3 times. If it doesn't open, strike it with your sword 3 times. If it still doesn't open, look around to see if you can see anything. And if you do see something, jump on my back." "I see an old woman," said John. At that, the horse took off at a gallop, racing along as fast as thought. When they reached the banks of the river, the old woman appeared behind them on a long stick carrying a broom in her hand. And when the horse jumped to the far bank of the river, the old woman struck the surface of the water with such force that the waters parted. She cried out, "Lucky for you that you got away!" Then the old woman went back. The horse said to John, "My dear Master Fisherman John, we will set off again tomorrow, but you must be very careful." The next day they set off again for the house at the edge of the neighbouring country. John kicked the door, then struck it so hard with the sword that it burst open. He grabbed the girl's arm, but he tore her blouse and was unable to pull her out. Again the old woman appeared on the stick with the broom in her hand. John said to his horse, "The old woman is coming!" And the horse raced homeward as fast as the winds of a storm. When he reached the river, he jumped to the far bank. The old woman lashed out at him with the broom and struck the horse's rump, but the horse was still able to leap to the far bank. The old woman cried out, "If you ever return, I will have all of your teeth." The next day the horse said to John, "Fisherman John, we won't go today, but tomorrow we shall. Today we must rest." Then he said, "Dear master, there is a tree in your father's garden with 3 apples on it. Pick them, put them in your pocket, and when we arrive at the house at the edge of the neighbouring country, throw one of them at the top of the door, one at the bottom of the door, and one at the middle of the door, but throw them so hard that you break the door down." So John did as he was told, and when they arrived at the house, he threw the apples at the top, the bottom, and the middle of the door, and the door broke down. The girl, Helen, stood in the doorway. John led her outside, and when they had left the house, John looked to see if he could see the old woman, and indeed, there she sat on her stick with her broom in her hand. John said to his horse, "Oh, the old woman is coming, on a stick, carrying a broom in her hand." So John and Helen quickly mounted the horse, and the old woman chased them. "Fisherman John, look behind us, because I feel that my rump is on fire." Johnny looked back and saw a cloud of dust far behind them. The horse flew onward, and when they reached the bank of the river, the old woman was still behind them, accompanied by 27 magic stallions. John's horse jumped to the far bank. The old woman and the 27 stallions tried to jump the river too, but they fell into its waters and drowned. And today they still lie somewhere beneath the waters of the river, if no one has fished them out. And so John rescued his sister Helen from captivity, and they both lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Miraculous Bird. Once upon a time, in a distant land, where the curly-tailed pig digs at the soil with its snout, there lived a penniless man. He was so poor that his daily meal consisted of nothing more than the things he was able to gather together in the woods and the meadows. Once, when he was trying to catch a bird for his lunch, he caught a very beautiful crow. The bird was as black as night, yet its feathers shone like the stars. The man took the crow home, and his children were delighted. They put it in a cage and kept it and cared for it. The crow grew, and eventually it became so tame that it ate from their hands and hopped about the room. One day a wanderer passed by. He looked at the bird, took it in his hands, and happened to look under its wings. Underneath its left wing was written that whoever ate of the bird's liver would become a king. Under its right wing was written that whoever ate of its heart would find 3 gold coins underneath his pillow every day. Now, who doesn't want to be a king? So the wanderer resolved not to rest until he'd had eaten the bird's liver. The poor man also saw the writing, but he did not know how to read. So he asked the wanderer what it said. "Alas, nothing good," he said. "This bird will die in 2 days. It would be better to kill it now. I happen to like the taste of crow, so if you roast it, I will give you 1,000 gold coins for the meat." So the wanderer placed the money on the table. The poor man regretted having to kill the poor animal, but he was in dire need of money. He didn't think much about it, but simply slayed the bird and roasted its meat. As the meat of the bird was roasting, the poor man left the kitchen for a moment. The children were playing around, and as they were hungry, they snatched the heart and the liver from the pan. When they placed the meat of the crow in front of the wanderer, surely enough he could find neither the heart nor the liver. He was furious. "Hey, you wretched man, where is its heart? Where is its liver?" But neither heart nor liver were to be found. Well, not having found the heart, the wanderer realised that he would never become king. He jumped up, not having eaten a single bite, and left. The poor man despaired. He regretted all the money he had lost. So he told his sons that they should vanish from his sight and not return until they had gotten all the money back. How the two sons worried, but what could they have done? They set out to find the 1,000 pieces of gold. They ambled and rambled with heavy hearts, until around sunset they arrived at the edge of a large forest. There they spent the night. When they awoke the next morning, a soldier was happening by. He gave them directions to the town, and the two boys set off. The king, it turned out, had very recently died. When they arrived in the town, they saw a beautiful golden bench. The older boy sat down on it, and the younger lay down underneath it, and they both immediately fell asleep. The next day, they awoke to the sounds of a large crowd of people who had gathered around them and were cheering them enthusiastically. The people took the two boys to the palace. The one who had eaten the crow's liver was immediately chosen as king. As it so happens, according to the customs of the town, anyone who didn't know that the old king had died and sat down on the golden bench would be chosen as the new king. They had had a total of 7 kings, each of whom had been chosen according to this custom. So this is how the older boy became king, and never again did either boy have cares or worries, for the older boy ruled as king, and the younger boy found 3 gold coins under his pillow every morning. Their father, in the meantime, deeply regretted having chased his sons away, so he set out to find them. By the time he reached the town, he had become so poor that he was forced to beg. He made his way to the palace, and the king immediately recognized him, and he ran to his younger brother. The younger son was also delighted, and they both embraced their father. Of course, they were not angry with him, but they were a little ashamed that he looked so dishevelled. They took him to a cobbler and a tailor and had beautiful clothes and boots made for him, and they let him stay with them at their new palace. And together they lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Lazy Boy. Once upon a time, there was a penniless woman. Her husband had died, and all she had left was a lazy son. Everyone called him Lazy Jack because he hated to work. The whole year through, he did not a bit of work, simply crouched in the corner in the winter time and dawdled in the shade in the summertime. One day the poor woman said to him, "Dear son of mine, bring me a can of water from the mighty river so that I can wash your filthy shirts and trousers." The lad merely shrugged his shoulders. "I would gladly go if I weren't so very lazy." But the poor woman continued to plead. "Come, my dear boy, if you go, fetch me some water so that I can wash. What will the world say? That I dress you in a dirty shirt and dirty trousers?" And she kept pestering him until finally he grabbed a can and plodded along to the river. He dipped the can into the water and was bringing it home. Well, as it so happens, a little fish in the can began to speak. "Listen, boy, set me free. Please pour me back into the mighty river." The boy replied, "I would gladly pour you back, but I am too lazy to go back to the river." But the tiny fish beseeched him, and finally the lazy boy turned back and poured the little fish back into the water. Again the fish spoke, "Thank you for your good deed, but I would like to repay your kindness. If ever there is anything you wish, simply say, 'Fish, fish, little fish, come grant me my wish.'" And no sooner had he spoken than he disappeared into the waters of the river. Lazy Jack took the water home, and barely had he put down the can when he put his hand on his belly and exclaimed, "Mother, I'm hungry." "If you are hungry, son, go where you might find something to eat." Suddenly Jack remembered the tiny fish and the promise it had made. "Fish, fish, little fish, come grant me my wish. Wine, meat and bread, a sumptuous dish." Hardly had he uttered the words when the table was creaking beneath the weight of food. Jack and his mother both ate their fill and were barely able to stand up from the bench. The poor woman began to do the washing up, and Jack lay down in a cool spot behind the house. As he lay there, the king's daughter came strolling along. "Ah, Lazy Jack, you have time to be lazy even when others are at work?" Lazy Jack got angry and retorted, "Fish, fish, little fish, come grant me my wish. Make this girl meek and mild, pregnant with child." And miracle of miracles, wonder of wonders, the princess indeed became pregnant. Each day her belly grew a little bit bigger, and 9 months later she gave birth to a baby boy. The child was beautiful, but in vain. The king was not pleased. He besieged his daughter with questions, wanting desperately to know who the father was. But she swore on heaven and earth that never had she once passed a night with any man. "But the boy must have a father. The earth yields no crop if nothing is sown." Wise men and sages advised the king to gather all the men in the kingdom, every last one, and make them stand in a line. Then they told him to put an apple in the child's hand and wait to see which man he gave it to, for that man must be the child's father. "Well, if it's that simple, I will order this to be done." And all the men in the kingdom were ordered to assemble. First came the soldiers, then the reservists, then all the other men. In vain, the child didn't give the apple to anyone. What could be wrong, wondered the king. Could the wise men have been mistaken? But the wise men insisted they were not mistaken, but that the king had clearly failed to summon all the lads of the land. Again the men were counted, and they realized that they had failed to summon Lazy Jack. So the king sent his soldiers to fetch him that instant. But it took half a day for him to come, for Lazy Jack had been asleep in the attic, and waking him up proved quite a task. But when they pushed him in through the door, the small child immediately gave him the apple. And suddenly everything was clear. Lazy Jack was the father of the princess's little boy. The king, of course, had hoped that the father would be a prince or a great man, and was not at all pleased at how things had turned out. "You have brought shame upon my old head, and you should be punished." So the king had his daughter, his grandson, and Lazy Jack placed in a barrel and thrown into the river. The water carried them downstream. At first the princess sobbed and moaned, but soon she realised that although he was lazy, Jack was a good and honest lad. She said to him, "Listen, Lazy Jack, this barrel is too small for the three of us. I would like a palace the likes of which I am accustomed to. Do something to get us out of this barrel." "I would gladly do something," said Lazy Jack, "but I am simply too lazy." But the princess continued to beseech him, and soon Jack grew tired of listening. "Fish, fish, little fish, come grant me my wish, a palace tall with towering walls." He had barely finished his thought when the waters of the river suddenly threw the barrel to the banks, where it broke into pieces. Then they found themselves before the gates of a beautiful palace. "Oh, how beautiful," said the princess. "This must be our palace." It was indeed their palace, thanks to the tiny fish and his magic. They made it their home and lived together happily. Lazy Jack slept so much that unless the princess had woken him up, he might very well have grown roots. And that's the end of my tale about Lazy Jack.